Yo, what's up guys? So we're gonna go through a recent sprint I've done for the game. This sprint, I called it technical stabilization sprint. So for those who don't know what a sprint is, it's for simplicity sake. A sprint is like you have a plan of action, and you just do it. So I usually make a document before I do anything, so I know what my goal is gonna be. What are my objectives? And I made different work streams that I would tackle. I know what my main priorities are, what's in my scope and what's out of my scope, what I would consider the definition of done, so that means to be completed, and the evidence I would gather. So the first step was to get a baseline profile of the game. So the baseline profile, as you could see here, so I had three separate checkpoint A, B, and C. I captured all this data regarding the FPS, what the frames are, the jaw, the GPU time, the inputs. I interpreted the data to find out what were the issues. Actually, before this, I got my friend to play the game. The game's FPS on his machine wasn't as great as I wanted it to be. It was 40 frames per second, which didn't make much sense because I was getting over 120 frames per second. However, his laptop is a potato, right? So if I could improve the frames per second for his laptop, then it's going to work on a lot of other people's machines. So as you could see, this was the data interpretation. The rendered deferred lighting is constantly the top of the GPU costs across all locations. So I had a lot of lights. I had like 407 lights. So they were doing real damage to the game. The Lumen reflections was at approximately 1 millisecond. So that was a consistent second cost. I was using a Lumen pipeline for Unreal Engine, which definitely made things a lot more complex instead of just baking the lighting. The shadow depths were between 3.37 to 0.53 milliseconds, which was also damaging performance, but it wasn't the lead offender. And then, as you could see, we have this VSM warning. It's an overflow warning, which is really critical. So usually the typical AAA studio workflow would be to audit every single light and monitor each light and capture its details. However, my approach as a solo dev has to be different. I cannot afford to monitor and audit each light. So next, I just removed the lights that were not needed anymore, and I also reduced the attenuation radius. Think of it as how much area the light shines. After doing that for hundreds of lights, the virtual shadow map warning now actually started to disappear. It was more evidence that the warning was still happening in certain areas, like a corridor, for example, or like the catwalk. What's really cool about Lumen is that it's a real-time rendering pipeline. So it allows to get these subtle, more realistic reflections on surfaces with the flashlight, which makes the feeling a little better. After that, I went on to look at the lighting complexity. So you see these are heat maps. So you could see the bar at the bottom. Blue is good and red is bad. And wow, was it very, very bad. So then I realized that there were more lights that were still shining too strongly and they needed heavy adjustment. And again, I did this for hundreds of lights. This is all in the name of FPS. After several hours, the light complexity of the map is now much better. I am trying to search for any red areas, and so far I cannot find any. This section here is bad, but I still could not figure out why. Exactly, so I went through all the lights that were present, unless I missed something. Sometimes it's a hidden light somewhere else that can affect an area, so that's tricky. Overall, the FPS is looking much stronger than what it started at. So then after the lighting was handled and sorted out, then I went to texture optimization. So before I touched anything, the game was sitting at 2.7 million kilobytes of texture memory fully loaded. After 6 passes of LOD Bias, adjustments across about 500 textures, I've got it down to 1.5 million kilobytes. That's roughly 1.13 gigabytes saved. That is a 41% reduction. So pass 1 was the biggest one. So the entire research megapack, 363 textures, LOD bias set to 1 across the board via property matrix. That single move dropped nearly 900 megabytes. Everything after that was just hunting down the high actor count groups and being surgical about whether to set them to LOD bias 1 or 2, depending on how close the player gets to those surfaces. And the payoff is the GPU time went from 3.9 milliseconds down to 2.7. In Pi, I'm sitting at 184 frames per second at 5 milliseconds. For a Lumen and VSM setup, that's a good place to be. So optimization isn't glamorous. Nobody boots up a horror game and thinks, wow, the LOD bias on those concrete textures is immaculate. But if I hadn't done this, half the people playing would have been dropping frames in the exact moments that are supposed to scare them. So it does matter. But I'm also glad I did this because the game now has good potential to work on low-end PCs now, which is quite nice. No guarantees, but that's what I'm gonna try and aim for in this Unreal Engine project, which, typically Unreal Engine projects aren't targeted for low-end PCs, but I'll figure out some type of way to get as many people able to play it as possible. So lighting cleanup, texture memory down, GPU times improved. The game runs, it runs well, and it's looking pretty good so far. Anyway, thanks for watching.